So glyphosate is the world's biggest selling herbicide. It works by inhibiting plant amino acid metabolism. It's widely used because it's a fantastically successful product. So in terms of farming production systems, food production systems if you like, it's become effectively an essential component of how to produce crops efficiently worldwide, and it doesn't matter what type of crop you're growing. And that's because it's cheap, it's available, and as I say, it's extremely effective. So in terms of producing good quality food at an acceptable price, it's an essential part of the toolkit.
Agricultural and non-agricultural uses of glyphosate have been on the rise year on year, almost a tenfold increase between 1994 and 2014. If glyphosate is the world's most used herbicide and is an essential component to the EU food system, then why are we in discussion of banning it? This is because of the definitive uncertainty around glyphosate in relation to its social and environmental impacts. But what are these impacts?
Once sprayed, glyphosate acid not only kills every non-gene modified plant, but it enters the soil, air, surface and groundwater. The half-life of glyphosate is longer than previously recognised, ranging from several days up to a year. It is possible that an incremental build-up of glyphosate contamination can occur. The continued and intensive use of the product has led to the emergence of resistant weeds, so-called superweeds, which urges farmers to spray increasingly more herbicides. Chris Morgan articulated nature's resistance to us.
That kind of weapons race against nature in terms of using very complex technology to try to control what nature is trying to do. There are pathogens in our ecosystems, there are things that damage plants. We have to work with those, we have to accept that those are there. If you use weed killer, you're putting a strong selective pressure on that gene pool of pests and diseases. In fact, the way I look at it is that you're actually strengthening those pests rather than actually dealing with them in the long term. So,
being an absolute weed killer and toxic to soil organisms, glyphosate damages the fertility and structure of soils, as well as reducing plant diversity and animal fertility. It has been found to cause cancer in laboratory animals. Glyphosate damages rat livers and kidneys, which shows parallels to the health effects of glyphosate in Sri Lanka, where the product was banned at one point due to glyphosate-facilitated kidney illness. Furthermore, glyphosate-contaminated soybean feed has caused severe birth defects in pigs and poultry.
Clearly there's a very strong environmental framework, a very strong environmental argument which is pushing for banning of glyphosate, but they're pushing for the banning of every single agrochemical. So that's from more an emotional weight of argument, and that has its validity. Of course, we'd all like food to be produced without agrochemicals. In practice, that's just not sustainable. I mean, we would not have food if that were the case. So, given that the agricultural systems that the world relies on need herbicides, and that the scientific evidence suggests that glyphosate is not a problem, then we can only hope that it will continue to be a product that's available.
This raises a potent question about conflicts of interest present in the debate on glyphosate, and the potential creation of research based on bad science that is trying to justify the cognitive biases that people and organisations already hold. It was the case with us at the beginning of this documentary that we set out to ban glyphosate. However, as we find ourselves in the position we are in now, it is clear that we were affected by the same conflicts of interest, the willingness to ignore information contradicting our stance.
The general population is exposed to glyphosate mainly through diet. Although it remains unclear exactly how much glyphosate we are exposed to, traces of the substance can be found in food, consumer products, and human urine. Glyphosate residues, for example, can be found in nearly all glyphosate-treated soybeans.
And glyphosate is got a particularly bad rap because of its connections to cancer, it's carcinogenic.
In 2015, the World Health Organization had, going against its own evidence, assigned glyphosate as being probably carcinogenic to humans and causing DNA and chromosomal damage in human cells. In 2016, however, they went back on their designation from 2015 and now operate on the stance that glyphosate is probably not carcinogenic to humans. Yet for farmers and those living in rural communities, there is a positive correlation between the use of glyphosate and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a very rare type of cancer. The frequency of this type of cancer has nearly doubled in the United States over the last 30 years. The formulations of glyphosate are more toxic than glyphosate alone. There are concerns that studies focusing on just glyphosate underestimate its impact and that regulation measures are therefore set inappropriately.
The balance of research is undoubtedly on the side that says that it's not carcinogenic, nor is it does it cause genetic diseases and the most recent finding from Europe also says that it's not an endocrine disruptor. So there was the WHO, the World Health Organization panel, which reviewed it last year, I think 2016, and came up with, after evaluation, their panel came up with the title or the label that it was probably carcinogenic. So that was one panel's review. That allocation is under severe question scientifically because it's now widely known that the panel weren't officially made aware of results which should have contributed to their discussions and which would have almost certainly have made them choose the opposite, or in other words, they didn't have any carcinogenic. It probably wasn't carcinogenic. And that would be in line with most of the other scientific evidence and all the other previous reviews that have happened, because of course all agrochemicals have to go through severe registration testing before they could be used in agriculture. So on that basis, that the allocation, the assignment that it's probably carcinogenic seems unsound.
After the loss of the patent of glyphosate in the year 2000, its price fell substantially. For example, in the United States, it had fallen by 40% as generic manufacturers worldwide sought to produce and market glyphosate. There have been major reductions in herbicide costs, as we use glyphosate to kill multiple weeds instead of using several different herbicides. In this sense, glyphosate is more technically efficient.
Practically dealing with weeds is one of the biggest problems for organic farmers who are trying to compete with conventional farming methods, and they're kind of equivalent, especially if you're just doing arable farming. You're basically trying to beat them at their own game.
There is also wide evidence that it has increased yields and therefore increased profitability of farmers. Plus, there are non-monetary benefits, such as reduced managerial intensity, that is less time and effort, and it also reduces the effort exerted by household labour. In relation to consumer preferences, glyphosate has helped provide us with low-cost, convenient food. In its non-commercial uses, there is extremely high costs involved with its alternatives. For example, on weed control along roadways in the United States, it costs approximately $20 per mile to use glyphosate. But on the other hand, alternative materials such as citric acid and clove oil have varied in cost from $360 to $2,400 per mile. As alternatives are remarkably more expensive, it led Richard to say,
well, there aren't alternatives at the moment, that's why we use glyphosate. And glyphosate, as every ag chem company would say, is a once in a lifetime find, like a magic drug, and so another one is unlikely to come along. There's no predictability to it coming along. There are, of course, other families of herbicides, but every agrochemical faces the challenge of registration.
Elaborating on what Richard has said, Chris offers a different perspective.
The glyphosate is being used for a reason. That certain methods of producing food benefit from being able to kill everything in an area. If we continue to do that and just ban glyphosate, then we put a lot of farmers in a very difficult position, because it's really difficult to do. It's very difficult to grow one annual crop on a massive field, sometimes hundreds of hectares in size, and not use any weed. So unless we change other parts of the food system, then yeah, that won't work.
Throughout all our research into glyphosate's economic merits and social and environmental controversies, one thing became abundantly clear. Glyphosate is integral to the global food system and to all the processes within it. It is from this that we began to understand that we cannot just ban glyphosate. Chris proposes that you cannot take issues like glyphosate in isolation, and that if you believe it is a problem that needs fixing, it has to be as a part of a broader drive to enforce systemic change within our food system.
Alternatives, yeah, on a more kind of systemic level. There's different ways of growing food, everything from permaculture to organics to allotment-based kind of systems that they do produce food and they don't need glyphosate. But like I said before, if you just make a law and you don't change any of the kind of infrastructural aspects of the food system, then that's insane. You need to provide incentives to move towards other modes of production. Well, we need deeper structural changes, and glyphosate is not just an evil thing that someone's tried to impose on us. It's actually symptomatic of that system. If you want a massive field and you want to grow one thing, glyphosate's your man. You can't get round that. It's a stupid way to grow food. And glyphosate's an equally stupid solution to that.
As Chris discusses the systematic consequences of phasing out glyphosate, which is essential to our food system, in addition to the presence of bad science and conflicts of interest, these are the arguments which we have used to take our new position on the glyphosate debate. But there is one other issue. A ban is not really a ban, especially with glyphosate. As we saw with Sri Lanka banning glyphosate, it was actually found that they temporarily reintroduced it to certain tea plantations, as it can no longer compete to the same extent as before. In this regard, the term ban isn't something which is credible. It is something which can be easily deviated from, and as a result, we have created our own proposals which are realistic and achievable, following our decision to not ban glyphosate.
We offer one major proposal with numerous different features. Understanding the difference between the renewal of a licence and the extension of one, we decided that renewing glyphosate's licence for 5 years is the most sensible course of action. Richard explained to us that the term renewal entails a full re-examination of glyphosate, including further research and more rigorous testing of the chemical. Glyphosate is an historically successful chemical, with a current balance of research greatly in its favour, so a ban at this stage will be based on false pretences. However, it is still important to look for alternatives, especially with the need to change the course of the wider food system. Alternatives should be researched and incentives given to reduce the need for glyphosate. Plus, a ban on glyphosate may lead to chemical alternatives now which are potentially more harmful than glyphosate itself. During this documentary, we have discussed the social, environmental, economic effects and consequences of glyphosate use in the current context of the European Union debate on the glyphosate ban. But given the evidence we have uncovered, it is necessary to finally get a definitive understanding of glyphosate. To eradicate the uncertainty and contentiousness that exists now, we need to move forward, whether that be with or without glyphosate.
Banning glyphosate would be a huge step backwards for production agriculture.